Hey everybody, Pastor Jim here from Rock Point Community Church. I hope you're hanging in this week. It's obviously been pretty strange. It's been a bit different, and it seems like it's going to be going on a little bit longer than we had hoped. However, I am really hoping and praying that you'll be able to look to God and gain some strength right now. Keep your eyes on Him and be focused and see how you might find yourself encouraged. I know for myself, I've been pretty busy at home trying to help manage school from a distance with the kids and Amanda and everything else. But been able to find a little bit of time to get to the office and just start looking through my shelves. I'm trying to find some encouraging material to fill my soul. Obviously, there's a lot of panic, there's a lot of angst, right? There's kind of the intimidation of the unknown. How long is this going to go on? What exactly are we facing? We don't really understand everything at this point. And so I'm just looking for something to encourage my own soul. And I'm looking at the shelf and I'm looking at some things that I haven't read in a long time, trying to find a good read. And finally, stumbled upon something I'm going to share with you. It's a little devotional. It's called 40 Days Living the Jesus Creed. Now, Living the Jesus Creed is something written by the author's name is Scott McKnight. And he talks a little bit about the idea of the Jesus Creed. And just so that you know, the Jesus Creed he's referring to is what the Bible calls the two greatest commandments. Jesus says that the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and we're to love him with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our mind, and with all our strength. And the second is like this: we should love our neighbor as ourself. And he takes those right from the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. The first part comes from the Shema, which means to hear, O Israel, in Deuteronomy 6. And then he takes the second commandment from Leviticus chapter 19. He puts them together, and as Scott McKnight calls them, the Jesus Creed. And he takes a 40-day journey through this Jesus Creed. And I thought it was quite timely that I picked this book up, because it is the Lent season, right? We're in the middle of the Lent season. That brings us from Ash Wednesday, 40 days out, to Easter. At this point, we are day 22 in the Lent season. And so as I was flipping through trying to figure out what to share with you, I thought the most natural thing to do would be to pick up on day 22. Now in this book, day 22 is titled Spiritual Freedom. He uses the verse Galatians 5, verse 1, for freedom Christ has set us free. I thought it was an interesting twist in things, since we're probably feeling a lot less free, right? We've not been feeling very free lately. If anything, we've been feeling restrained and of course self-quarantine, which is wise at this point. It's something we should be practicing if we can. To stop the spread of the coronavirus, get this thing to calm down and go away sooner than later. However, in the midst of all this, there is an opportunity here to look towards our spiritual freedom, to regain even some of our emotional freedom, our emotional health, as well as our mental freedom and our mental health. And so as Scott McKnight begins writing about spiritual freedom, he refers to the Apostle Paul, and he says, listen, when he talks about freedom, he's not just talking about personal freedom in the sense of doing whatever you want, or even political freedom, in the sense that the government's role in providing opportunity for happiness and protection and rights and these kinds of things. So he's not talking necessarily about personal freedom or political freedom. He's going to deal with a Christian sense of freedom. And then that's going to give us something encouraging to work with as we go throughout the rest of this week. He writes this: so what does a Christian sense of freedom mean? It means finding Jesus Christ and learning to experience liberty from sin and its shackles, so we can live a life of loving God and others. Humans are truly free only when they love God, love themselves, and love others. And just for a moment, I want to just encourage you right now, if you're feeling the pressure of being restrained, if you're feeling the angst of being concerned about health issues or even potential financial trouble because of all this, and we don't really know what that's going to look like right now, I want to encourage you to not forget God made you and you are valuable. We need you here. We want you to look towards God so that you can keep your mind in all these situations. Jesus even says in Luke 18:1 to never give up and keep praying. So don't forget to love yourself. Love God, love yourself, love others. So the question is now, how can you and I find this freedom? He keeps writing. At the bottom of all Christian reflection on the Christian life is the rock-solid conviction that God's Spirit animates everything we are to do. The Jesus Creed life requires the Ruach, or of God's Ruach, which is the wind of God's Spirit. So first, we need to slow down to quiet our hearts and to quiet our minds. One, we need to quiet our hearts. We need to quiet our minds. Then we need to turn our face toward God, asking God to do with us what God did to the early Christians at Pentecost, which was to breathe out the Spirit upon them, upon us. Now, don't expect this necessarily to be an ecstatic experience. Expect only that God will honor what God wants to do, give his life to us so we can live his kind of life. His kind of life. Now, he continues to write a little bit about Paul's experience in recording the Jesus Creed, as he calls it. The Jesus Creed teaches that life is about loving God and loving others. Paul was a rabbi, one who knew the Torah very well. But what he had to learn was that the Torah needed to be understood as a Torah of the Jesus Creed. Notice these radical words of Paul's. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. As I mentioned, Jesus took this right from Leviticus 19, verse 18. Amazingly, Rabbi Paul was willing to reduce the whole Torah down to one command, the second half of the Jesus Creed: love your neighbor as yourself. I think that's interesting in this time of angst and worry. We can easily find that if we turn our attention to God and think about ways to encourage others from a distance, we can actually take our mind off of some of the worry and angst we're carrying ourselves. Paul did not come upon this insight by himself. He heard it from those who had heard Jesus. Rabbi Paul became a Jesus Creed Paul, empowered because he learned that the ability to love your neighbor as yourself entered into the community only through God's Spirit of freedom. Do you need a little more freedom? I know I need a little more freedom. I'm an extrovert. Right? Few people have joked about how this thing is, I guess no problem for the introvert. Well, for the extrovert, right, we need a little bit more freedom. But you might feel like you need a little bit more freedom no matter what situation in, because these are interesting times. God says this. God grants us, Scott says this about God. God grants us the freedom to do what God made us to do. What God made us to do was to love others. Anytime we use the freedom to harm or dishonor others, we deny ourselves true freedom. And anytime we use our freedom to love others, we find ourselves truly free. Many people are in a quest for inner freedom, but when we seek freedom in order to consume it ourselves, for example, saying, I want to be able to do whatever I want to do, we actually enslave ourselves to our ego. But when we love others as ourselves, not only do we discover the joy of love, but also we find we are free at last. And then he quotes Galatians 5:13, which says, For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become servants to one another. And as I wrapped up reading that and giving it some thought, I felt that there was a very practical way to put this into practice, even now from a distance. Because we're desperate for community, we're finding ourselves spending a lot of time on social media. And if we spend too much time on social media right now, we'd be kind of anxious, right? We'd be worried. It's just this constant, incessant following the coronavirus and what's going to happen next. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't follow and that you should not be aware and taking proper precautions. But here's my challenge to you and to myself. Throughout the rest of this week, I want us to go on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever you use, and we are going to water down the impact of coronavirus concern by posting good news. I want to see pictures of your family. I want to see happy times posted, vacation pictures. I suggest you put up some encouraging scriptures, maybe some religious sayings that just give you a new sense of hope. Let's water down the angst on social media and fill it with some good news so that we can practice loving others. And what God is promising is that as we love others, we will begin to experience a greater freedom even in the midst of self-quarantine. So I hope that this little word will encourage you, will give you strength for the rest of the week, and we will see you back here, live stream only, of course, Sunday at 10 a.m. We'll be on Facebook, we'll be on YouTube, we'll have a service with the band, we're going to social distance everybody, and we were going to share an encouraging word with you. And just so that you know, we are going to put a pause on the current series. And we're going to start talking to you and with you directly about how to handle ourselves in the midst of this situation so that we can turn to God and find rock solid peace and strength in seasons of uncertainty. So thanks for tuning in. This is Pastor Jim. I'll see you on Sunday live stream. I hope you do well. God bless.